myself, Kim Jones, and Rick Wadsworth.
Hi, guys.
This is going to be Principle 5. A quick overview of the NAADAC Code of Ethics talks about using appropriate assessments. This is going to be where your BPS comes in handy, as you'll be able to collect the necessary information to individualize assessment for your clients. As always, this is going to be an ethics course, so ethical use and interpretation is so important to ensure that when we are using assessments and interpreting them, we're using our clinical cap to remove personal biases, make our communications clear, and use humility and continuing education to be competently trained with the tools that we're using. One key to ethical assessment is going to be the use of a calm and functional environment free from distractions to keep results as valid as possible. And then cultural and legal considerations have to always be used during assessments and analyzation. We as providers must be able to objectively observe and evaluate to provide the best practice. In diagnosing, we must be using several forms of assessment to ensure proper diagnosis. This is going to be that clinical process of using primary assessments, screeners, second rounds of screeners, ASAM, level of care, and then ongoing assessment and interpretation to create a treatment plan that is specific to the individual. And then maintaining integrity in the assessment cycle means that we're using assessments that we are legally allowed and obligated to based on our agency policies. There's no modification being used without evidence-based and reliable research scientifically conducted, and that fully informed consent is given by the client. This information is going to be part of the privileged communication between you and your clients, so there's no sharing of results without consent and a release of information. And then when sharing your results with the client, there should be consideration of possible risk or harm in the way it is delivered based on things like culture, gender, shame, things that would affect the client in a negative way. And then in preparing to conduct assessments, we have to consider the intersections of identity. This is going to include age, race, gender, primary language, and other cultural considerations. Considering there's a large majority of assessments that are normed with middle-aged Caucasian males, it's our ethical duty as providers to ask the questions and find the information to support the usability, reliability, and validity of these assessments. Usability is going to refer to how easy it is to administer and interpret an assessment. There are going to be 5 considerations in terms of usability: length of time to complete, clear directions, easy and accessible scoring, if there are similar forms of assessment, and knowledge of problems reported by users of these assessments. So if there's an issue that's constantly reported by a specific population for an assessment, we shouldn't be using that on that population, or there should be some type of mitigation. And then knowing whether an assessment is valid requires that it has been able to accurately measure and perform what it was designed to. Most standardized assessments have been rigorously tested by the scientific community to ensure that clients are being consistently given gold or best standard assessments. It can be hard to sort through issues of validity, but most assessments will have an associated article that delves into the research process before it was standardized. And then reliability is going to be the process of an assessment that consistently measures what it was intended to. It's possible for an assessment to have reliability without validity, and while consistency is important, there's more value placed on validity because as clinicians, we have to have valid measures to diagnose and plan treatment. We can combat the possible issues presented by lack of reliability by using several forms of assessment, though. And then assessment will likely include directions on how to administer, such as who is filling out the information, whether it is on paper or a technological format, and such. It's important to always attempt to follow the standardized administration in order to have valid results. So how do we ethically administer, interpret assessments? To receive proper informed consent, providers must explain the 3 W's. What is the evaluation? Why is it necessary? Who will the results be seen by? Along with an explanation that evaluations are not a form of counseling or therapy. Once written consent is given in an accessible manner, then you can proceed. One of the main forms of possible harm or ethical concern is going to be dual relationships. And this comes in when we're using forensic assessments. We as providers cannot perform evaluations of clients or anyone who has a current or previous relationship with us. And this is just going to protect both of us, the client and us, from harm. There are many forms of assessment, from urine analysis, blood work, client interviews, questionnaires, and surveys. Consistent assessment is going to allow for the best continuation of care and is going to lead to ethical diagnoses and recommendations. And then it can't be said enough that when we have our clinical cap on, we become objective focused and check our biases at the door. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Rick to talk more about cultural context and consideration.
Excellent. So learning to be culturally competent requires several different things. We're trying to learn how to walk in other people's shoes, at least to the degree that we can, and understand what life forces have shaped their worldview. And we need to remember that we're being invited into their world and need to be sensitive, and instead of thinking that they're coming into our world. Their space is sacred space. We need to make sure that we're curious, that we are humble, and that we employ good active listening skills so that we see and hear and understand what they're trying to tell us, so that that can help shape the trajectory of our relationship and our counseling. There are 3 core principles that we need to remember: to be empathic, to be respectful, and to be humble. We all know what the golden rule is to treat others the way we want to be treated. But the silver rule is a follow-up. Treat others the way that they would most appreciate being treated. And I think that as we do that, that builds relationships of trust. So developing a cultural competency is a lifelong practice that requires constant effort and willingness to learn, to ask potentially awkward questions, revise our thought patterns, examine and expose personal or collective bias, and give others the benefit of the doubt, assuming that they're doing the best they know how with what they have available to them right now. So I want to share with you on this slide right here on the right, you see the black and the white. I want you to stick your finger over the screen right in the middle of those two and tell me what color that is. As you do that, you come to see that it's really the same color, top and bottom, and that things are not always the way that they appear to be on the surface. And that's going to be especially true as we look at people's situations and as we dive deeper and deeper, we come to see what is really real and true and valuable and important in their personal lives. We need to make sure, as Kim mentioned, that we check our biases at the door. We need to make sure that we are not being ethnocentric and assuming that we know based on our worldview and our life experience. We need to make sure that we are not allowing previous biases to impact the way that we're seeing things in the moment. We also need to make sure that we're using inclusive language, and that can be as simple as using phrases like we and us instead of just you, and kind of keeping them in a corner. I think it's important that we use validating statements and phrases often to let them know that we appreciate the good that they're doing, that we're rooting for them, that we're doing what we can to help them out. We need to make sure that we are always assessing, like Heido says, ABA, always assess the situation and parenthetically make sure that we're making changes and adjustments accordingly. So what I want to do right now is I want to read for you quickly a case study and then have you ponder on the problems that are happening. James Carter, a licensed SUDC counselor, was assigned to conduct a court-ordered substance use evaluation for Robert Thompson. Thompson is a 47-year-old man facing DUI charges. This evaluation would be used by the judge to determine whether Thompson required mandatory inpatient care, probation, or other legal recourse. Upon review of Thompson's case file, James realized that they had a history over 20 years previous. Thompson was one of his early clients in an outpatient program. During that time, Thompson had been difficult to work with, frequently resisted recommendations, and even filed a complaint against James for being, quote, unquote, too rigid in his approach. While the complaint was dismissed, James had never forgotten it and privately believed Thompson had manipulative tendencies and a lifelong problem with substance use. Despite this history, James did not recuse himself and proceeded with the evaluation, already convinced that Thompson had not changed. Using a single self-report questionnaire that was not valid for forensic assessment, James described Thompson as a chronic substance user with a high likelihood of relapse, close quote. despite the lack of biological confirmation, collateral reports, or supporting data from additional assessments. The court, relying on James's evaluation, ordered Thompson into a 90-day inpatient program, which was far more intensive and restrictive than what was clinically necessary. So if we break down this case, we're going to see several ethical concerns. First of all, there was a dual relationship with Thompson as a former client. He also allowed his personal biases to get in the way of his objectivity. There was a lack of multi-method assessment, a lack of integrity in the results, and Thompson was placed in an unnecessarily strict treatment environment. So just a few questions to ponder as you close out this video. If you were James's co-worker or supervisor and found out what was going on, what would you say or what would you do? If you were in James's shoes, what would you say or what would you do? And if you were called in as a second opinion in a court as a witness, what would you say or what would you do?
And that's our module 6, 5. That's all, folks. Goodbye.